Happy whatever day of the week it is for you. I'm Shannon Egley. Welcome to Microscopy 230, Digestion. So we're going to start off this by looking at the alimentary canal, or the digestive tract, and talk about each one of the sections for digestion. And I thought, what would be cooler than to bring you to the med school and actually see where med students learn about the exact same thing that we're talking about today. So med students will learn in a little bit different way than you do. Some people think it's really hard. I think it's really cool because you might go to school for a whole day and you learn math for an hour, or science for an hour, and then English for an hour, or whatever it is. You break up into hours and learn a lot of different topics. But the med students, they've all done all that, and so now we treat them in a different way. We teach them by blocks. So for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, every day that they come to school, they learn about one specific system of the body. Like they'll talk about the digestive tract or the GI tract, and they'll come into this classroom and they'll learn about the anatomy of one specific organ and then the physiology of how that organ works. So they might talk about the stomach, and then they'll talk about digestion and how digestion works. And then they'll talk about the diseases that happen. So what if you get an ulcer in the lining of your stomach? What would happen then? And then they'll talk about the pharmacology, or the medicines that you can take to help fix that, or the antibiotics you can take if it's a bacteria that's causing it. So for the better part of a day, they'll actually sit in this room and they'll learn all the steps of that organ. And then the next week or the next day, whatever, they'll do the same thing but with a different organ. So for about 4, 6, 8 weeks, they're specializing in one system of the body, which is really exciting because they get to be a cardiologist or a neurologist for this amount of time, where they're learning to be that specialty. It's kind of like a training camp, and I think it's really cool. And then during that day, usually at the end of that session, their team of 4 that sits at one table will get a chance to play detectives, and they'll be given a case study where they get to apply their anatomy and physiology and pharmacology and pathology skills to see if that team can figure out the answers for this case. So what's happening to this patient? How did they get this way? How do we know that they're in this situation, and what can we do to help them? So it's actually kind of fun, but hard at the same time. So we're going to do kind of the same thing with the different systems of the body as we're going through this. We'll talk about digestion, and then I'll show you each of the steps of digestion, each of the different tissues that we're looking at in the organs, and we'll talk a little bit about diseases or compare our anatomy to other animals. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So if you open up your manual, you'll flip to Microscopy 230, and we'll go to page 1. So the GI tract is also known as the alimentary canal. It's a canal that passes from your mouth all the way down to the other end of your body. And we also call it the gastrointestinal tract, because gastro is referring to the stomach, intestinal is referring to the intestines, and that's really the bulk of the passageway, are those 2 sets of organs. There are 8 stops along the way, and there are really 4 major processes that happen. So let's go ahead and jot those down. As we go from one organ to the next, I really want you to pay attention to these 6 steps and the 4 major processes. So we'll talk about ingestion just briefly, but ingestion is the actual process of putting food in your mouth and chewing it and getting it ready for swallowing. You can put things in your mouth, chew them and ingest them, and then spit them out, and then the whole process stops. So you actually have to have another process called propulsion, which means to move things back. So when you propel things or push things backwards, what you're doing is swallowing and getting it down to the next organ. And your GI tract is just a system of organs, one stop at a time, to do specialized things, like your mouth. We'll talk about why it's important in the process. I mean, you could put food directly into your stomach if we put a hole and a port in there, but it's not going to be the same. Right? The third thing you want to watch for, and actually 3rd and 4th kind of combined, is breakdown of foods. There's mechanical, which is the chewing or the ripping and the tearing and the shredding of the food, and there's chemical, which means that we use chemicals released by our body to help digest or break things down that we can't do mechanically. For instance, with mechanical digestion, the process of chewing, grinding. It doesn't matter how long you chew and grind, you can't break the food like a cheeseburger down into small enough particles for your body to actually absorb it, which is number 5, into the blood. So if you're chewing and chewing and chewing, you might get it to a mush where it all looks exactly the same, but the problem is that those proteins and carbohydrates and fats are not small enough still to to be able to get into your bloodstream. So you have to have chemical digestion that goes in and mixes with it and breaks it down from a protein into little pieces called amino acids, or a carbohydrate into little tiny sugars that are easy to absorb. And you might think, oh, you absorb all the sugar, that's why we gain weight from eating so many calories. But in reality, those sugars have to be so teeny tiny that it's one sugar at a time going across. So for something like lactose is a 2-sugar particle. Your body can't absorb it unless you have a chemical in there that comes in and splits it into 2 individual small ones. So that's why people that are lactose intolerant actually are missing this chemical to break down the lactose, and it causes a lot of problems with their body. So absorption is the process of getting it from your GI tract, a tube that goes from the top, in your mouth, all the way down into your bloodstream so that your brain can use it, or your arms can use it, your muscles can use it for strength. The last process is whatever's left over, or whatever things your body rejects, goes out through defecation, so the release of these things back out into the environment. Let's go ahead and get started with this process, and we're going to look at the mouth.